Well, hello there. I wanted to follow up on my testimony video and give a little background on some of the things that I had mentioned related to promiscuity. But I know that this may be a repeat. However, since I'm new at this video thing, I think I lost my video about this information, which I believe is important. So I'm going to repeat it. And if you hear it twice and you don't want to listen, then just sign off. Otherwise, I would like to share what I've learned in my private practice about sexual trauma. I have found that 3 out of 5 women have experienced childhood trauma that relates to sexuality. A lot of it is either rape, molestation, incest, and with men, about 2 out of 5 men have experienced sexual trauma in early childhood. But the problem with men is they don't want to report it. They don't want to discuss it. They don't even want to acknowledge it. And so it becomes very difficult for men to open up, even in therapy, about these particular issues. However, these are the kind of issues that absolutely need to be discussed with a trusted individual, and therapists are used to dealing with this. There's an old expression, you're only as sick as your secrets. And these childhood traumas related to sexual issues definitely want to be kept in secret. And they definitely, over time, can make an individual extremely sick. And that usually comes in the form of anxiety, social anxiety, panic attacks, depression. But anyways, we'll get into more of that later. But right now, I wanted to discuss my own issue and how it came to be and how I came to understand it. It's interesting to note that when we're examining sexual issues and trauma, it's important that the individual understand that sexual experiences, even when unwanted or undesirable, can feel good. And that creates a conflict, what we often refer to as this tension. And the body has its own natural responses to stimuli. A predator knows that if they can arouse those natural impulses in a person, that they can persuade them to do sexual things that they want them to do and take control over them. In addition, if the victim has a temperament of people-pleasing or a passive disposition, they can be easily overcome by a predator. Now, in my case, this happened when I was 5 years old. My mother and father got divorced, and my mother remarried. And she attempted to keep my sister and myself. However, I was a very unruly child, and I was very faithful to my father, and I was not going to be receptive to this new man in my life. So what happened was, this man, he says to me one day, "I'm your daddy now. You can call me daddy." And, with this childhood anger and hostility towards the divorce, I said to him, "You're not my daddy. You'll never be my daddy." And then I spit on him. Well, this man was a 6'3" Marine drill instructor, and he could command hundreds of men, but he couldn't control this 5-year-old child. This rebelliousness was just too much for his ego and pride. And so he said to my mother, "If she wants to go live with her effing father, take her to her effing father." Well, that left my mother to make a decision that was very difficult for her. God bless her. She was In her early 20s, she was a tiny woman, only 4'10". She'd never worked a day in her life. She came from wealth, the only daughter of an indulged and entitled parenting. She was barely educated and had a hard decision to make. Today I realize how difficult that was for my mother. She was given an ultimatum that it was either going to be me or it was going to be her new husband. And she was not prepared to raise 2 children by herself. The logical decision was for her to take me to my father's house, since that's where I wanted to be in the first place. Now, my sister was only 3 at the time, so she was still moldable. So my sister remained with my mother and her husband, and I went to live with my father. There was one problem with that. When my mother took me to my father's house, he wasn't home. Now, he had remarried also, but his wife wasn't home. So my mother, God bless her, she left me on the doorstep with a note pinned to me explaining what had happened and that she was sorry she had to leave me there, but she had to leave. On that day, I was abducted and raped by a young man who lived in the apartment complex. He came up to me and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm waiting for my daddy." And he said, "Well, do you want to play?" And I said, "Yes." And he took me behind a bush and he raped me and then returned me to the stoop. That literally formed how I perceived my value for the rest of my life. However, the actual trauma wasn't understood until I was about 10 or 11 years old, when my grandmother was explaining things like purity and chastity to me. Then I realized something had happened that had violated my virginity. I say that because over the years, it made me feel unworthy. It made me feel dirty. And I didn't have the kind of respect for myself that, had I addressed that issue with my father immediately, something could have been done. That's when I needed counseling, right then. But that never happened. The counseling should have come, but it didn't. And as a matter of fact, people won't agree with this. There's a lot of people in the therapeutic industry that don't agree with this next statement. But the rape wasn't the problem at the time. The defiant attitude was the problem, because it set a pattern in my life that resulted in a lot of traumatic experiences. In therapy, it's critical to get to the root of the problem, and it takes courage so often to do that. So in early childhood, I wasn't prepared to disclose or share that information. I didn't even understand it. But that defiant attitude became the catalyst that led up to a lot of my trauma. Recognizing and taking responsibility for our actions doesn't come easy. My anger and resentment, it started the dominoes falling. A little sidebar here. If someone wants to DM me and have a personal discussion or a conversation about their own childhood, I'm open to that. And I'm fine with it. And I welcome the personal discussions, which are entirely confidential, of course. I also want to add that I never got formal counseling for those events. However, having done a thorough 5th step, I got to the root of the problem, and the problem was me. In addition, when becoming a therapist, personal issues have to be addressed. Otherwise, a condition called countertransference can occur, and the therapeutic relationship becomes violated. And this is extremely unhealthy for the counselor and the client. As a matter of fact, it creates a toxic relationship between the two. I will look forward to elaborating more on any of these things in later videos. And of course, if anyone has questions that they feel they need to have clarity on, feel free to ask. I try to be open and transparent, and I think that that's where the healing lies. I hope you have a great day. And once again, you can put your personal comments in the box, and I would appreciate that. And God bless you. And I hope you really have a wonderful day. And I know this was real serious information, but I believe this information has to be discussed. So have a great day, and I hope you join me on the rest of my journey.